Welcome to Talent Talks, brought to you by the 4As and the 4As Foundation, where we spotlight leaders who are actively demonstrating ways to create inclusive and equitable workplaces. I'm Cathy Butler, EVP of Talent, Equity, and Learning Solutions. On today's episode, I am incredibly excited to speak with Josh Loebner, Global Head of Inclusive Design at VML. Welcome, Josh.
Kathy, thanks so much for allowing me to be here and share a conversation with you.
I am really excited for everyone to get to know you. I was so inspired after our little prep session. And the first thing that I think would be a fascinating story is to get a little bit of background on you and how you came to this role of Global Head of Inclusive Design at VML.
Well, yeah, thanks for letting me share the stage and talk a little bit about my background. Just to level set with everyone, I have what's maybe known as a non-apparent disability, and that basically means by looking at me, you can't tell I'm disabled. I'm fully blind in my left eye, legally blind in my right, and I use a white cane when I'm not in videos like this to help me navigate. I've been in advertising for a little over 20 years, always on the agency side. Before I was in advertising, though, it was a bit of a circuitous route here. I enjoyed camping and hiking. I work fully remote in East Tennessee, and there's beautiful surroundings. I had a lot of friends who didn't really enjoy going to classes and sitting in a classroom, and they were in forestry. And some of them said, "Hey, why don't you come with us? We get to go camping and and walk in the woods." I had slightly better vision back then. I still couldn't drive, but I could navigate a trail in the woods. And I got an undergraduate in forestry resource management. But I soon realized when I had some internships, one high in the Rockies, which was gorgeous and beautiful, that it was very isolating. And I enjoy talking to people and I enjoy working through problems in a way that needs communication and conversation. So it was a bit of an isolating career. I also had some misadventures in New Zealand in the woods where I literally got lost and didn't know how to get out of the woods. But when I did, I kind of vowed to myself that I need to think of a career that maybe getting lost is not something that happens on a regular basis. I and I had some friends in advertising and family, and I talked with one of my family's friends who was a strategist, and she said, "I'm going to do a SWOT analysis on you, Josh. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What do you like? What don't you like?" And I was young and in between careers. I knew I needed to go to college again, maybe for a master's degree. And they said, "Have you thought about advertising?" I said, "No." And I went back to the university and took a career aptitude test. And lo and behold, it did not say forestry at the top. It said advertising. So, yeah, I had this computer showing me I needed to go there. I had a person in the industry suggesting maybe this was right. And so I received a master's degree from the University of Tennessee in advertising management. I felt like I got a one-way ticket to New York City afterwards. I didn't want to return home and did a lot of door knocking. Landed at Young and Rubicam back when it was at 285 Madison Avenue, so I can claim madman status. And that was the start of my career. Just a little bit more to where I am today. I received a PhD. My research focused on disability inclusion in advertising. That was from Clemson University. It was one of the first, if not the first, degree solely focused on advertising within the creative process and where disability and accessibility fits into that. And now I've been at VML, previously Wunderman Thompson Legacy, and VML is a recent merger between Wunderman Thompson and VML Y&R, which is fabulous. Where I'm now global head of inclusive design. Been here for about 3 years now.
That is terrific. I think if we dove a little deeper, we could probably find some correlation between being in the deep woods and also on Madison Avenue. There's lots of complex problems to solve, ways that you need to find your way out, so to speak. working with brands and such, and we'll dive into that certainly in a moment when we get to talking about how you work with brands. I think one thing you told me in your prep session is that you've done writing and exploration, and that's how we worked with brands for some time in terms of your observations and recommendations on accessibility and disability. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that is an interesting path to get to where you are now today.
Yeah, so just to share a little bit more about that pathway of progress, and I remember just sitting in my cubicle at Y&R looking around, literally and figuratively, not a lot of other folks with disabilities in the room. Additionally, this was in the late 90s. Very few campaigns supported or had representation of people with disabilities. There was the Paralympics, right, every 4 years, which still rings true, where we see representation and inclusion of people with disabilities celebrated and recognized, which is important, right? And there are other tentpole moments, whether it's the Oscars or the Super Bowl here in the United States, or other moments internationally that are important, where sometimes marginalized groups are seen more. But when I recognized that there weren't a lot of people, both on screen or in the industry, I also looked at the trade media, right? What was being written about in Ad Age, Ad Week, The Drum, Campaign, etc. Not much was being written. If articles were being written about disability inclusion, it was about the creative, not the creators, and it
Mhm.
didn't dive into the complexities of disability inclusion. So I started a blog, and again, that dates me, right? Advertising and disability.com, where I was bringing conversations to the fore that weren't being shared otherwise. I was interviewing creative directors, um, agency team members, people from the disability community, and just writing my own opinion about disability in advertising. I would argue, just dating myself again, one of the first, if not the first, talking about the subject of accessibility, disability inclusion in advertising in a way that hadn't been written before. So it got a lot of traction. There were different brands and agencies that started to reach out because, again, there were very few of us that were vocal about the topic or had lived experience about it. And so I started to um, gain clients and do some work in the space and carved out a niche, both for myself, and at that time I had left Young and Rubicam and was at a boutique agency uh, in Tennessee, but was gaining international conversations and commitments from clients and teams. And so through that, it started to open the door to more work and elevated visibility. And again, also seeing that not a lot was being written about it, not a lot was being taught about it either in
Mhm.
academia. So, um, in parallel to my work role, I did pursue a PhD, which is it was critical and important, right? With the 4A as a professional organization, there are so many opportunities to learn, to grow, to network, and to advance in leadership and subject expertise within the industry as a professional. At the academic level, for students with disabilities or others that may not even know about what being an ally means, or faculty members who've never heard about the topic, that's an important space as well to be able to ensure that people moving into the profession start to learn more about disability inclusion. So both from my writing, just in my opinion pieces and thought pieces, as well as my academic writing, that was the start of leading to where I am today, and wonderfully it continues.
It's amazing. I don't think you're dating yourself at all. I think all of the things you talked about is very, very relevant for today. One of the things I find so interesting and fascinating about your perspective, your lived experience, and how you bring that to your work is really that intersection of creator and creative. I think that there is a common misperception that those with disabilities should focus or do usually focus on spaces that is around disability or inclusion. And brands tend to be in a space where it's really a stereotypically representation of that experience as well. But in your work in both, I think, VML and with your brand, you are taking a perspective and work and actively working on, dare I say, myth busting and sharing sort of the difference in that. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, myth busting is important, and that's something that we do every day. Any marginalized group has language that needs to be navigated, perceptions, social norms to be able to have a welcomed voice at the table, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. And for those people who may not be a part of the disability community every day or not know what allyship means, that's where myth busting is really important to get these individuals who may not have considered the value of disability inclusion, inclusive design, accessibility, and representation within advertising, what it means. And so myth busting, um, just to be quite straightforward, means educating and sharing information. And that can be workshops that we facilitate internally amongst our creative teams or others to understand where accessibility and disability inclusion fit in within the creative process. It can also mean having a wonderful rapport with a client that, oh, by the way, they may have an accessibility center of excellence, chief accessibility officer, or other team members that focus on disability and innovation. And if they do, then the myth busting starts to, well, it's already taken place. But for those brands that don't, right, we don't want to wag our finger and say, oh my gosh, why are you not doing this? And say they're doing everything wrong. Everyone's at a different point along this pathway of
Mhm.
inclusion and representation, and we're at a precarious moment right now. And so, you know, myth busting hopefully can, and importantly, um, not only start at an individual or a team basis, but systemically we can start to make that change. And it takes a commitment. But that commitment doesn't have to seem insurmountable like a Mount Everest. Oh my gosh, we have to make every single piece of our communications accessible and inclusive. Again, myth busting can start with just simple education and understanding to get teams to recognize, oh, maybe we start with one commercial or one advertisement or one piece of content online, and we can build it from there. And for consumers that are within the disability communities or allies, um, being able to see that authenticism will definitely ring true, and be able to show that that brand isn't in it for maybe a flash in the pan moment or notoriety, but hopefully that brand can suggest that this is one point within a longer narrative of connectivity with communities. I will say just one last point about myth busting. Research is important. Insights, welcoming people with disabilities into customer surveys, quantitative research, qualitative research, digital tracking studies, social content listening, to be able to start to create a mosaic of not only those consumers and personas who are very familiar with people who may not recognize disability as valued, but also for them to start to learn from that research why disability is important, and to benchmark and to grow that research in trending it. And we have seen some of that. Kantar recently produced a disability consumer study that was an aggregation of information and insights. And several others have as well within the advertising industry. So it's an opportunity to start to share this research so that many more people can recognize not only where we are, which is at a
Mhm.
deficit in many places, but also where we can go to bridge gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the research and the inclusivity around research is just it's one step. And I imagine it's an important and critical step as part of your inclusive design process. Can we take a step back and learn what inclusive design is for you and your practice area at VML?
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't be more proud to be a part of VML and the WPP family. Uh, just to share a little bit more about inclusive design, at a definition, inclusive design is more of a methodology that ultimately welcomes recognition of knowing that there is exclusion, but also where inclusion can come in. That there's a phrase in the disability community: "Nothing about us without us," and hopefully not only myself, but others from disability communities can be voices at the table to ensure that what we're doing is authentic, is welcomed, and that we can pivot where needed to bring more accessibility and representation into our campaign. So, as Global Head of Inclusive Design, in my role alongside others, we'll anchor into account teams alongside client teams to educate, to be able to, from the creative brief stage onward, showcase how accessibility and disability inclusion can easily be woven in, that it doesn't have to be the ultimate point within any project, but we simply want to be represented and included alongside anyone else. What I will say is that inclusive design leads to some type of measured outcome that more often than not, greater accessibility. But disability representation is also important. So there are different levels of outcome for inclusive design. Number one, foundationally, we can have greater accessibility, which could mean captions or subtitles on a video, whether it's a digital video or a broadcast video, that those can be a component. That we can have audio descriptions, which captions are for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also being used by so many more people who have no disability. And we're seeing more time on advertising, more click-throughs because of captioning, which is wonderful. And we're seeing more creativity incorporated into captioning and other accessibility features. Audio descriptions are used in videos, and they're for people who are blind or partially sighted. An audio description is basically what it sounds like. It is an audible verbal description of the tableau around what's taking place in a video that can't easily be interpreted if it's not spoken. And then there are other ways, of course, to make websites accessible. Image alt tags to ensure that screen readers can easily interpret what is shared visually within a website, live text, and so many other considerations within websites, apps, and digital experiences. That's a foundational consideration. We also look to innovate within the industry by being thought leaders, by, as Global Head of Inclusive Design, showcasing as a North Star, hopefully, where our industry can go. So being supportive of professional organizations like the 4As, to be able to have conversations like this, to understand that we are at an inflection point, that it is a precarious moment, but that there is value to be able to not only talk about some of the challenges, but also the commitments and the opportunities ahead and value of welcoming disability in advertising. So that hopefully helps to frame what an inclusive design leader does within an advertising agency. And then on the brand side, there are chief accessibility officers, disability inclusion innovators. And what I will say about VML and WPP, we were the first holding company and agency within the industry to create this role of global head of inclusive design. And wonderfully, I'm truly proud and honored to continue to be able to take that torch and shine the light on the pathway forward. What I will say, though, is I was not the first in this role. Christina Mallon was my predecessor, and wonderfully, she was the person who brought this role to life. She and I continue to collaborate. She's at Microsoft as head of inclusive design there, and she and I wonderfully work together as client and agency collaborators.
That's amazing. That is super helpful background on inclusive design. I think one thing that I've heard you talk about is both the power of business and the power of creativity when it comes to inclusive design. Power of business, business outcomes driving business growth. We talked about Walmart. And then the power of creativity, we talked about can even representing inclusive design. Do you want to expand on those two areas?
Yeah, definitely. As a retailer, Walmart is, a global leader, one of the best that brings hundreds of thousands of brands together on their shelves. Walmart has an accessibility center of excellence. They have disabled leaders. And wonderfully, they bring that to life in so many ways. I do want to take a moment to pause and showcase that disability sometimes may be interpreted in a thin vein of consideration, where people may think of who aren't disabled may think of disability as simply maybe wheelchair users
Mhm.
or people who are blind that use white canes or people who are deaf or hard of hearing. But there has been an expansion of definitions of disability. We can think of individuals and groups who are identify as autistic or have other cognitive disabilities or differences. What Walmart has done now in the United States, they have sensory hours for individuals who identify as autistic or who potentially may have post-traumatic stress syndrome or other considerations where um, in those sensory hours every day at Walmart, they throttle down some of the noise that's heard in the store where they lessen the volume on their PA announcements. They turn down the volume on their televisions and other technology that they have in their electronics section. They ensure that their lights are at a certain, um, I guess, lumen. So that's one consideration, but as well, Walmart has a dedicated page that showcases adaptive products on their website. So, props to Walmart to what they're doing. Unilever, they have a director of accessibility. Unilever has an accessibility center of excellence. Microsoft has a wonderful chief accessibility officer and an entire team dedicated to accessibility baked into everything that they do. So there are brands, there are retailers, there are agencies that are moving forward into this space. But what I will say as a kind of a cap on this point of the conversation is that there aren't enough of us. It's a rare
Yeah.
day that I connect with somebody else. Now, what I will say is we have employee resource groups that welcome people with disabilities, people with neurodiversity, both at our agency, across our sibling agencies and holding company, and across the industry. There are those, but there's still very few of us in the industry. So it's wonderful to be able to have a conversation like this and allow others to both in the industry to recognize it. But maybe there are some people who are listening to this conversation that
Mhm.
coming into disability, right? I was born with my disability. If we
Mhm.
look at people in the industry, everyone will become disabled who's watching this. And the longer we live, we may not be disabled, but we can age into disability. Disability can come in through um, other frameworks, accidents, genetics. And so um, we will all be disabled, and it's something to be comfortable with. It's a complex conversation, right? But for
Mhm.
those coming into disability, know that there are people at agencies, people at brands that are quite open to the topic and willing to welcome dialogue and welcome people to the communities.
Yeah, that's terrific. I want to come on to that in a second in terms of as an industry, how do we create space and to create a beacon for folks who have a disability and are looking to get into industry. But I think the one thing we talked about before, and I keep thinking about, is that inclusive design can be very creative and actually a different way of engagement. I think about Stranger Things and what
Yes.
they did to create that space. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Stranger Things did?
Yeah, definitely. My philosophy and methodology is that accessibility can be a gateway to creativity. So Stranger Things, I'm sure everyone's familiar, but if not, it is a wonderful series on Netflix, and they took a very innovative approach to accessibility within their captions, where oftentimes captions are an afterthought. It's actually something that the creative teams at agencies typically, and even on the brand side, it's not part of their process.
Right.
It's separate and apart, and a third party vendor works on it. And what is provided is adequate, right? But what Stranger Things did, instead of simply divesting themselves, the writers and creative team from the captions and thinking of it as, oh yeah, somebody else will do that. They had a copywriting team dedicated to the captions to make it another layer of that engagement so that viewers not only heard things, but for those who can't hear everything that's taking place, the words that were within the captions were quite evocative. They were sublime. They were words that got so much notoriety. The Times of London, New York Times, so many influencers across social media channels uh, showcased what was taking place in Stranger Things because of that uniqueness. They were one of the first to say, hey, why don't we reorient what this thing is that we have to
Mhm.
do, that's powerful, that can be meaningful, that can be welcoming both to individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing and anyone else who wants that additional layer of creativity. So that's really, I would argue, a fulcrum of change for our industry to be able to recognize that accessibility, just like anything else that we incorporate, whether it's a voiceover, whether it's on-screen talent, the props, um, our brand style guides, right? All of these
Mhm.
various elements where we're placing the media, uh, the entire ecosystem of a customer journey and a campaign can be elevated by accessibility in a way that it continues to pull consumers to that
Mhm.
next step, to uh, from awareness to consideration to purchase to being a loyal consumer to really thinking about a campaign and maybe laughing about it in just in a different way. So there's opportunities for accessibility to truly be creative, and that's something that our industry really is at a point now that hopefully we're starting to do that. And just to share a final point on this uh, is that advertising is unique, right? We create short cinematic masterpieces, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, sometimes
Yep.
15 seconds. If we're talking about video advertising, if we're talking about a static or still ad that's a display ad online or a traditional print ad, right? It's a fleeting moment. So we have to really be quick about
Mhm.
how accessibility doesn't seem convoluted or complicated or deconstruct anything that we want to be able to connect with consumers. So accessibility in advertising is a bit unique and different from accessibility in long form. But what we don't want is somebody who engages via accessibility within Stranger Things. And if there is an ad break, that accessibility drops off entirely and they don't engage with that content that could be a part of that
Right.
continuity of accessibility. We want to keep it going. And to do that takes um, champions, takes people who understand and hopefully welcome accessibility in a way that we can powerfully drive change.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that the Stranger Things example is so interesting because oftentimes we think about designing for the edges, as we might say, is really designing for all. And in that particular use case, they really maximize the opportunity to be creative, knowing that their audiences were so engaged that they're really deep into like the theory and the whole experience of Stranger Things. And they took a moment or a way to connect with the content and really built it out that then gain them a whole, broader fan base than I think that they even thought about. So for me, that's the creativity in this space. I think that is underestimated as what we can do. Again, to the point of designing for the edges really is designing for all, and you can create such unique experiences for everybody and being inclusive on top of that.
I'll just build on that real quick, Kathy, and that, for those individuals who are listening that may be unfamiliar about the disability communities, you mentioned connecting to the edges, but also welcoming everyone. 1 billion people globally have some form of disability, and it's probably underrepresented. Here in the United States, well over 60 million people have some form of disability. So these are not small numbers. $13
Mhm.
trillion of expendable income. And that includes um, if we add friends and family and others within that circle, disability is not isolated. I have a wife and 2 daughters who are not disabled, but rest assured, if there is an ad that has somebody with a disability, my kids are like, Dad, look at that ad. I'm like, yeah, either we did it or somebody else did, and congratulations to them.
Yeah,
Hopefully it's authentic and powerful. Um, so it's important to know that this is not a small group, even though we may be designing for edge cases. Those edge cases are actually large populations that
that's
want
right.
to be included, that want to be brand loyal, that want to spend their money at places that welcome consumers with disabilities. And so their money is just as important as anyone else's.
That's right. And that's the business case, as some might say, is needed for creating a different or a capability, a new capability within an organization, or looking at hiring practices and things like that. Coming on to that, the population of disabled or folks with disabilities, like you say, is tremendous. And we also know that unemployment in this population of folks is also tremendous. So, as an industry, how do we continue to be a beacon for individuals with creativity, inspired folks like yourself who want to be part of advertising? What can we do differently to be welcoming, push open that door widely for folks with disabilities?
Well, it starts with being open and comfortable as somebody with a disability to share that maybe you have some reasonable accommodations that you may need within your role. And those may be things that if you come into disability you're unfamiliar with, or you may be disabled coming into a position. And so be comfortable identifying as somebody who has a disability, whether it's a physical, sensory, a cognitive disability,
Mhm.
that your management, your people team can be able to work with you in a way that allows you to be your best. Um, and I often say that advertising is the most powerful media that's out there, right? More powerful than movies or books. Advertising gets people to take some type of direction, to move forward in some way, shape, or form, to take an action. And it's not just about selling products. Advertising can change minds, showcasing people who hadn't been seen before, to be
Mhm.
able to have people with disabilities in a way that is authentic, is real, and is welcoming, lets communities know that we're here and that we should be simply just um, as part of that community. Uh, Advertising also is about celebrating differentiation. It's about iconoclasts, whether it's the brands or the creators. Um, and for people in the disability community, rest assured, we're all about differentiation. And I would suggest that many of us are iconoclasts, right? In our own way, shape,
Yes.
or form, in the differences that can be positives. Our lived experiences can showcase that we are resilient, and we have ways of doing things that may be a bit different, but hopefully we can achieve what we want to achieve in a way that's meaningful to us and others. So be comfortable in who you are, but also um, the wonderful point of where we are within the industry is we are seeing more roles such as mine, um, uh, both at the agency side and brand side. We are starting to see more research within this space. So it's a wonderful time as somebody with a disability to be open, to be an advocate, or if you're not disabled, to be an ally,
Mhm.
um, to welcome those that maybe hadn't been welcomed before, to allow them to be a part of a campaign, whether it's in developing it or being represented on screen, right? There are talent agencies that represent people with disabilities, people with physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities. There are agencies, there are a few boutique agencies that focus on disability inclusion. And so it's a point now for um, people, whether university or in the industry, whether it's a young professional or somebody in upper management, to say it makes sense to bring people with disabilities because they have expendable incomes, because they haven't been represented in the past, and because there's a way that could allow them to be the change. And just to talk about the industry is changing. We're seeing Cannes Lions this year creating excellence in image descriptions for 2025, one of the first, if not the first, major industry award focused on accessibility and accessibility from a creative point of view.
Mhm.
This award isn't looking at image descriptions that are bland and don't provide a welcoming connectivity, but ones that can be sublime and evocative. Can also change their glass line to be able to expand the aperture beyond those marginalized groups that they had recognized for the glass line previously to now include, amongst others, disability communities and how we can
Mhm.
be innovative within our creativity to reflect, support, and bring them into creative campaigns. And there's also an inclusive design award at Cannes Lions. And so hopefully the International Festival of Creativity in Cannes Lion can be an educator, can be provocative to the industry to say, look, there's a value to this and it's meaningful. And
Mhm.
it's not meaningful simply to a small group, but we can welcome so many more people, both as creators in the industry and within the creative that we output to showcase that disability is important and needed.
That's right. That's so exciting. And I feel like such a significant cultural moment for the industry, the recognition. As we all know, many in the industry are really focused on awards, as we should be. Those are critical and important. But this particular shift, I think, is such a good signal to the industry. With that said, I think it's also important to recognize, and you sort of nodded to this, it's a precarious moment, with the administration, the executive order. How are you navigating this moment and guiding your clients on how to continue to support and why it's so important to continue to support the work?
Well, it is a precarious moment. Resilience is something that's needed by all.
Hmm.
And just know that precariousness and disability is something that is not new to individuals or disability communities. Uh, I was born 3 months premature. The doctors told my parents not to name me because I wouldn't survive. I only weighed 2.5 pounds. I went down to 1.5 pounds. I was in an incubator, isolated for 3 months.
Hmm.
I survived. I thrived. Many people with disabilities have varying levels of precariousness on a daily basis,
Mm.
including how they navigate work, how they navigate their personal life, how they navigate um, uh, any of their individual or other challenges, right? Precarious moments in communications, precarious moments with accessibility. So this is not new to the disability community. We are resilient. We know how to be able to hopefully um, go from point A to point B where there may be barriers and gaps to bridge. But what it means is that we can't falter um, or back down from where we are or what we're doing.
Hmm.
Every day we have a charge within my role and others in the industry who either supporters or allies or advocates to continue to champion disability inclusion, to push the industry forward, to have conversations like this with the 4As, which is truly a wonderful organization. Professional organizations, continue to navigate the changes within the industry deftly. And our North Star is to showcase to individuals, to the industry at large, to agencies, to holding companies, um, not only where we've been in our past or where we are right now, but where we need to go.
Hmm.
And so again, whether it's conversations like this, whether it's policy commitments,
Hmm.
supporting as a case in point, the European Accessibility Act, which is coming online in 2025, um, whether it's bringing forth policies and guidelines within the industry, educating people, supporting employee resource groups, to be comfortable to have those places where there can be um, uh, conversations that may be ones that you want to confide in others, that it's okay to be able to talk. I'll say again, my wife isn't disabled, my kids aren't. I love being a part of my employee resource group within VML. I'm the executive sponsor for our North American Resilient Together
Hmm.
employee resource group, and that's one of those times that I get to talk with other people with disabilities relatively regularly and
Hmm.
have candid conversations where there may be vulnerable topics to discuss, but that we can be open about it. So, really, it's a moment to, yes, recognize the precariousness, but also the possibilities ahead. We have to be
Yeah.
optimistic to say, yes, there are challenges and barriers and impediments, but also, uh, again, we are problem solvers, not only as
Yeah.
people with disabilities, but advertising is always about seeing how we can navigate very difficult situations and rise to an occasion that allows us to be able to seen above others. So it is a time to reflect, but also a time to project how we can be at our best.
Wow, that is an amazing sum up. I was going to ask you one more question, but I'm going to hold off on that because there's no topping that end. I appreciate this discussion so much, Josh. And I look forward to continuing it. I think this is the start of a future of discussions and focus on people with disabilities, and to remain really steadfast, like you said, and focused and project what is the road ahead, because we are problem solvers, and there's no better way or no more creative way, I think, to problem solve than on this topic and with this agenda. So thank you very much for your time. Just wrapping up, it was incredible. This discussion has been super inspiring for me, and I know it will be for our listeners as well. Thank you for joining Talent Talks today, brought to you by the 4As and the 4As Foundation. Tune in next month to hear more from leaders who are focused on inclusive and equitable workplaces.
Thanks so much.